The notification lit up my screen, a cold, blue slash in the dark of my home office. It was a message from my mother-in-law, Eleanor. No greeting, no preamble. Just 7 words that should have shattered me: he deserves a wife from a proper family. I read it once, then again, the letters burning into my retinas. A strange calm settled over me, a quiet that felt heavier than any anger. I looked from the phone to my laptop, its sleek surface reflecting the city lights beyond the window. This wasn't just any laptop, it was the command center for a business that had just cleared 7 figures in its first year, a machine worth more than the luxury sedan his parents had so proudly gifted his sister. A faint smile touched my lips, not of joy, but of finality. The begging was over. The proving was done. I set the phone down, face down, the way you might close a book you've already memorized. My fingers found the keyboard, and I got to work. If you've ever been told you aren't good enough, that you don't belong, then you understand the quiet fire that ignites in the silence that follows. You know what it's like to be measured against a standard you never agreed to. This is the story of how I stopped trying to earn a seat at their table and built a whole new restaurant. If this hits home, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your stories remind me I'm not alone, and I hope mine does the same for you. Before the text, there was the tapestry. A tight, intricate weave of 1,000 subtle threads, each one a reminder of my place. It started small, almost imperceptible. The first time I met them, at their sprawling estate in Connecticut, Eleanor's eyes swept over my off-the-rack dress like it was a stain. Charming, she'd said, the word a delicate weapon. His father, Richard, asked about my people, and when I said my mother was a teacher and my father ran a small hardware store, he'd simply nodded and turned the conversation to the stock portfolio he'd built for Mark. I was the anomaly, the variable their perfectly balanced equation couldn't account for. Holidays were the worst. That first Christmas, I spent weeks carefully selecting gifts. For Eleanor, a beautiful silk scarf from a small, ethical designer I adored. She'd unwrapped it, her fingers barely grazing the fabric, and set it aside with a polite, "You shouldn't have." Later, I found it in the guest room I was using, draped over a chair as a makeshift dust cover. The same day, their daughter, Charlotte, unwrapped a set of keys to a brand new Mercedes. The room erupted in applause. I remember standing there, my hand instinctively finding marks, my smile so fixed my cheeks ached. I told myself it was their way, that they showed love through grand, expensive gestures. But a grand gesture for me would have been remembering my coffee order. The slights were a constant, low-grade hum in the background of my life. They'd talk about legacy, about bloodlines, about the importance of marrying someone who understands the pressures of this world. I was an outsider, a tourist in the land of old money and older expectations. I tried, God, I tried. I learned which fork to use, which wines to pair, how to make small talk about sailing and summer homes in the Hamptons. I folded myself into a smaller and smaller shape, trying to fit into the box they had for me. But the box was never meant to hold me. It was meant to keep me contained. The night I launched my e-commerce store, a curated marketplace for independent artisans, I was buzzing with a nervous, hopeful energy. I'd built it from scratch, teaching myself to code after my day job as a graphic designer. I showed the website to Richard, my heart pounding with a fragile pride. He'd scrolled for maybe 10 seconds. "Very cute, Maya," he'd said, not looking up from the screen. "A nice little hobby. But Mark tells me you're still freelancing. You really need to think about stability, a 401k. He'd then launched into a story about how he'd secured Mark a promotion, clapping his son on the back. I felt the air leave my lungs. My little hobby was my soul poured into lines of code and a belief that business could be beautiful and ethical. To him, it was a doodle in the margin of a serious document. That was the pattern. My triumphs were quaint. My ambitions were naive. My love for their son was the only thing of value I apparently possessed, and even that was constantly being appraised for its purity, its durability, its worth. I began to feel like an imposter in my own life, performing the role of the grateful, striving girlfriend, then wife. The text message, when it came, wasn't a surprise. It was just the final, blunt instrument. It was the moment the tapestry tore, and I saw it for what it always was, a cage. I want to show you how the words meant to break you can become the blueprint for your freedom. When my mother-in-law told me I wasn't from a proper family, she had no idea she was handing me the key to a life she could never control or diminish. This isn't a story about revenge, it's a story about reclamation. It's about what happens when you stop seeking validation from the wrong people and start building it for yourself. I spent years trying to shrink myself to fit into their world, sanding down my edges until I was almost nothing. But you can't win a game where the rules are designed for you to lose. The moment I stopped playing was the moment I started winning. I built a business, a home, and a sense of self-worth that doesn't bend or crack under their judgment. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own life, if you've ever been made to feel that you are fundamentally not enough, then you know the deep, quiet ache I'm talking about. I'm here to tell you that ache is not a weakness. It's a signal. It's your spirit telling you it's time to build your own table, on your own land, and invite only those who truly see you to take a seat. Hit subscribe and join me, because the journey from being rejected to being untouchable is one we shouldn't have to make alone. Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from, your city, your car, your own quiet corner, and let me know if you've ever had to draw your own line in the sand. It didn't start with a text. That was just the final, formal eviction notice. The real story began years earlier, with 1,000 tiny paper cuts that slowly bled me dry of the person I used to be. If you've ever been in a room full of people and felt completely alone, you know the landscape I'm about to describe. It's a quiet, cold place built on backhanded compliments and deliberate omissions. My husband, Mark, came from a world of old money and even older traditions. The Ashworths weren't just wealthy, they were a dynasty, and I was the unvetted software update threatening to crash their entire operating system. I remember the first time I walked into their home for Thanksgiving. The air smelled of lemon polish and inherited confidence. I wore a dress I'd saved for months to buy, feeling grown up and elegant, until Eleanor glanced at me and said, "It's so brave of you to wear color." It was navy blue. The subtlety was the point. The insult was crafted to be deniable, leaving me questioning my own perception. Was that a slight, or was I just being sensitive? That was their genius. They never shouted. They whispered, and their whispers were louder than any scream. Mark was always caught in the middle, a man torn between the family he was born into and the wife he'd chosen. He'd squeeze my hand under the table and whisper, "That's just how they are, Maya. They'll come around." But they never did. They just turned up the volume on the quiet hum of disapproval. Family vacations were spontaneous trips to their private club in Aspen, planned for dates they knew conflicted with my biggest client presentations. My birthday was perpetually overlooked, while Charlotte's was a week-long spectacle documented in the society pages. I was the ghost at their feast, a faint smudge in the periphery of their perfect family portraits. I tried to earn my place. I learned the difference between Chardonnay and Chablis. I could discuss the stock market with Richard and the best charity galas with Eleanor. But the more I tried, the more I felt like a performer in a play where I hadn't been given the script. I was an actor pantomiming a role, and they were the audience that refused to applaud. The weight of their constant assessment was a heavy coat I could never take off. It affected everything: my confidence, my sleep, the easy laughter that used to come so naturally between Mark and me. I was so busy trying to prove I was good enough for them that I forgot to ask if they were good enough for me. The night of the text, I wasn't shocked. I was relieved. The passive-aggressive war was over. The vague, lingering sense of not belonging had finally been given a name, a shape, a 7-word sentence. They had drawn their line in the sand. And for the first time, I was ready to draw my own, not with a timid toe, but with the unshakable foundation of the life I was about to build without them. The first Christmas I spent with the Ashworths was a masterclass in how to dismantle a person with politeness. I had arrived feeling hopeful, my arms laden with carefully chosen, thoughtfully wrapped gifts. For Eleanor, I had found a stunning silk scarf from a small, female-owned artisan collective in Thailand. The colors were a vibrant, beautiful echo of a painting I'd seen in their foyer. I'd spent hours imagining it complementing her elegant winter coats. The moment of the exchange was a spectacle of crinkling paper and performative delight. When it was my turn to give, I handed her the flat, elegant box. She peeled back the paper with surgical precision, her expression unreadable. Her fingers, adorned with heirloom rings, lifted the scarf. She didn't bring it to her cheek. She didn't marvel at the workmanship. She simply let it drape over her hand for a moment, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. "How thoughtful of you, Maya," she said, her voice a soft, cool blanket smothering my anticipation. "You really shouldn't have." She then folded it with a brisk efficiency and set it aside on the sofa, as if it were a delivery that had arrived at an inconvenient time. The conversation immediately pivoted back to the roaring fire, the weather, the wine. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. Later that evening, I went upstairs to fetch a sweater from the guest room, the room that was always mine, never ours, a detail that now seems painfully symbolic. And there it was. My beautiful, painstakingly chosen scarf. It wasn't in a drawer. It wasn't hanging in a closet. It was draped over the back of a vanity chair, doing duty as a makeshift cover for a faint ring of dust. That small, silent act was more devastating than any shouted insult. It wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. My offering, a piece of my heart and my taste, was deemed functionally useful only as a dust cloth in a room nobody important ever saw. The real blow, the comparative splash of ice water, came minutes later when we all gathered back in the grand living room. Richard, with a theatrical flourish, presented his daughter Charlotte with a small, velvet box. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a set of keys. The Mercedes dealership had one last G-Wagon in that cerulean blue you loved, darling, he said, as if he were mentioning a new brand of toothpaste. The room erupted. Charlotte squealed, throwing her arms around him. Eleanor clapped, her eyes shining with genuine tears of joy. Mark laughed, hugging his sister. I stood there, a statue with a frozen smile, my hand still faintly smelling of the wrapping paper from my own discarded gift. The juxtaposition was a brutal, unspoken lesson. For Charlotte, a six-figure vehicle, a symbol of ultimate belonging and worth. For me, a scarf deemed worthy only of protecting furniture from dust in a forgotten room. It was in that moment, surrounded by their joyful cacophony, that I understood the economy of this family. Love was a currency, and I was bankrupt. I didn't cry that night. I just stared out the frost-laced window of my temporary room, watching my faint reflection ghosted over the manicured lawns, and made a silent promise to a version of myself I was already starting to mourn. I would never again offer my heart wrapped in pretty paper to people who only saw its value as a cleaning rag. The launch of my e-commerce platform, Artisan Heart, was the culmination of 2 years of sleepless nights, sacrificed weekends, and every dollar of my personal savings. It was more than a business, it was my soul translated into code, a digital home for creators like the woman who had made Eleanor's scarf. The night we went live, a mix of terror and exhilaration coursed through me. I was buzzing, my fingers trembling as I pulled up the website on my laptop in the Ashworths' formal living room. Richard was nursing a scotch, scrolling through financial news on his tablet. "Richard," I said, my voice a little too bright. "I'd love to show you what I've been working on. It just launched." He gave a non-committal grunt but gestured for me to approach. I placed my laptop on the coffee table, the homepage glowing with beautiful photography and clean, elegant design. I explained the concept, a curated, ethical marketplace connecting skilled artisans directly with consumers, cutting out exploitative middlemen. He scrolled. For 10 silent seconds, his eyes flicked across the screen. Then he leaned back, took a sip of his scotch, and said, "Very cute, Maya." The word cute landed like a physical blow, diminishing years of labor into a child's finger painting. He didn't look at me. His gaze was already drifting back to his tablet. "A nice little hobby. But Mark tells me you're still freelancing. You really need to think about your future, a stable career, a 401k. Health insurance." Before I could form a single word in my defense, he was off, his voice warming as he turned to Mark. "Speaking of which, son, I spoke with Henderson at the club. That VP position is opening up. Now that's a real trajectory. We need to get you in front of him next week." He then launched into a detailed strategy for Mark's career advancement, clapping him on the shoulder. I was left standing there, my laptop humming, my cute life's work glowing uselessly between us. The silence that screamed from them was a verdict. My ambition was a quaint distraction. My passion was a financial liability. My dream was a hobby, while a corporate title was a real trajectory. I closed my laptop, the click of the lid sounding like a door shutting. In that moment, I didn't just feel dismissed, I felt invisible. My creation, the thing that gave my life meaning and direction, was nothing more than background noise to the serious business of being an Ashworth. There's a particular kind of loneliness that only exists in a crowd, and I became its expert. The lowest point wasn't a grand, dramatic scene. It was a quiet Tuesday, 6 months before the infamous text. I was in the guest bathroom, my bathroom, on the second floor of the Ashworth estate after another strained family dinner. The conversation had been a relentless tour of Charlotte's latest European vacation and Richard's golf handicap. Any attempt I made to contribute was met with a polite smile before the topic swiftly veered back to familiar Ashworth territory. I finally excused myself, claiming I needed to freshen up. I locked the door and leaned against it, the cool wood a stark contrast to the heat of my shame. I stared at my reflection in the gold-rimmed mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. She wore a cashmere sweater Eleanor had gifted me, a shade of beige I would never choose for myself, chosen to blend in. Her makeup was flawless, her hair sleek. She was performing Maya Ashworth perfectly. But her eyes were empty. I saw the ghost of the girl I used to be. The one who wore bright red lipstick and laughed too loudly, the one who believed her ideas were powerful and her voice mattered. Where had she gone? A single, hot tear escaped, tracing a path through the carefully applied foundation. I didn't sob. I just watched it fall, a quiet acknowledgement of a profound loss. I was disappearing. Piece by piece, opinion by opinion, I was sanding myself down to a smooth, inoffensive nub that could be easily stored in the Ashworth attic of acceptable things. I thought of my parents, of the noisy, loving chaos of my childhood home. They'd be so confused by this polished, silent version of me. They'd ask where my fire had gone. And I had no answer. In that sterile, beautiful bathroom, surrounded by monogrammed towels that weren't mine, I faced the terrifying truth. In my desperate quest to be accepted by them, I had become a tenant in my own life. I was paying rent with my personality, and I was on the verge of eviction. The ache was so deep it was a physical weight in my chest. It was the sound of my own spirit, screaming from the bottom of a very deep, very quiet well. Now, you might be thinking I'm the villain in this piece. That I was too sensitive, that I should have tried harder to understand their world, to win them over with relentless kindness. Maybe you're sitting there thinking, family is family, and you just needed more patience. Look at everything they gave Mark, the security, the connections, the legacy. Wasn't that worth a little discomfort? I used to have that same argument with myself in the dead of night. I'd lie awake and run through a checklist. Was I not gracious enough? Did I miss some crucial social cue? Should I have taken those etiquette classes Eleanor once subtly suggested? I tortured myself with the idea that if I could just be better, smarter, quieter, richer, thinner, then I would finally hear the click of the lock accepting me. But here's the truth I finally grasped, the one that set me free: you cannot win a game where you are not a player, but the ball. Their acceptance wasn't a prize to be won through perfect behavior, it was a birthright I could never claim. I was not from the right lineage, the right zip code, the right tax bracket. My very existence was a disruption to their narrative. My kindness was seen as weakness, my ambition as arrogance, my different perspective as a flaw. Trying to earn their love was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom, an exhausting, futile effort that would only ever leave me empty. And as for Mark, I loved him. I still do. But I finally understood that his family's gifts of security and legacy came with invisible strings, strings that were tied around his wrists and, by extension, mine. They weren't offering a welcome mat, they were issuing a membership with a rulebook I never agreed to. The cost of that security was my soul, and that is a price no one should ever be asked to pay. So, if you think I should have just endured it for the sake of family, ask yourself this: what is a family that demands you disappear in order to belong? That text message. He deserves a wife from a proper family. For years, those words would have been a dagger. They would have confirmed every hidden fear, validated every slight, and sent me spiraling into a pit of self-doubt. I would have dissected it, wept over it, and likely drafted a dozen pleading, defensive responses. But that night, something was different. The text didn't land as an attack, it landed as a release. It was the final, official paperwork for a prison I had already walked out of. Reading those 7 words, I didn't see an insult. I saw a reflection of the woman I had been when I first entered their world, the one who believed their definition of proper was the only one that mattered. And then I looked up from the phone's cold glow to the warm light of my laptop screen. That machine, my tool, my creation. It was worth more than their symbolic luxury car, yes, but its real value was immeasurable. It represented a mind they couldn't control, a spirit they couldn't break, and a success they could never take credit for. The text wasn't a wound, it was a key. It unlocked the final chain, the one forged from my own desire for their approval. It was the moment I realized their proper was a cage, and I had already built myself a kingdom. I smiled not because I was happy, but because I was free. The war was over. They had fired the last shot, and I was already living in the peace they could never touch. I set the phone down, not with anger, but with the quiet finality of closing a book I had already finished reading. My work awaited. My life awaited. And it was infinitely more proper than anything they could ever imagine. They tried to teach me that my value was something to be awarded by them, a stamp of approval I had to earn through the right clothes, the right conversations, the right, quiet submission. But they were wrong. Your worth isn't a verdict handed down from a throne of old money and older prejudices. It's not determined by the name on your family tree or the zip code you grew up in. It's an unshakable truth you build yourself, brick by brick, with every late night you spend honing your craft, every no you refuse to accept, and every quiet promise you make to yourself in the mirror. I didn't just marry their son, I outgrew their entire world. Their mansion, their trust funds, their silent judgments, they all became small and distant, like a model village viewed from a soaring plane. The life I built, with its late-night coding sessions, its risks, its triumphs that were mine and mine alone, became the real empire. The Ashworths measured wealth in decades of compound interest. I learned to measure it in the freedom to be wholly, unapologetically myself. The most powerful thing you can ever build is a life that doesn't require anyone else's permission to be magnificent. Their rejection wasn't the end of my story, it was the brutal, necessary beginning. It was the fire that burned away the need to be chosen, revealing the power I had to choose myself. And that, I've learned, is the only inheritance that truly matters. If you've ever been made to feel like you're on the outside looking in, if you've ever had your dreams called a hobby or your heart treated as disposable, I need you to hear this: your story isn't over. It's just waiting for you to pick up the pen. Don't let someone else's narrow definition of proper or worthy dictate the boundaries of your life. The most radical act of rebellion is to build something beautiful from the pieces they thought were broken. Start that business. Write that book. Learn that skill. Create the life that you deem successful, one that doesn't ask for permission or apologize for taking up space. Your validation is an inside job. And you don't have to do it alone. This community is proof that we are stronger when we lift each other up. So, let's keep building together. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked that quiet fire in your own chest, then do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Let me know you're out there, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and one boundary you're ready to set for yourself. And while you're at it, give this video a thumbs up, it tells the algorithm that stories like ours deserve to be heard. Your journey from overlooked to unstoppable starts now. I'll be right here with you.